Good afternoon. Today is December 8th, 2023. My name is Maneta George, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Ms. Noelle Ojo for the Library of Congress Archie Green Fellows Program in Labor Law. Good afternoon, Noelle, and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. George, and thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. What I want to do is to ask you to begin by telling us your origin story.
Okay. As it relates to being in the Foreign Service?
Well, you might want to tell us a little background about how you got to the Foreign Service.
Okay. So, born in Brooklyn, New York, and as a young teenager, my family and I moved to the DC metro area. And so grew up, went to high school in Montgomery County, Maryland. And from there, went to Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm a proud Rattler. And there I did a business degree. I have a bachelor's of science in business administration, and then it was a 5-year MBA program. So then I got my MBA. So in 5 years, I graduated, and then went to law school because the plan was, I was 16 when the Rodney King riots happened. It impacted me greatly. I felt that law was the way to go for African Americans to make change in society. That in the past, that had been the way that change was made for us. And so I was really bent on being like a civil rights attorney, possibly a public defender, things along those lines. And but got to NYU School of Law, and I chose NYU because they have a really rich interest and focus on public interest and public service. So did that. And my first summer, I got a grant to go overseas because I knew I had some interest in doing some work overseas or experimenting. I had never been abroad before. And got a grant to go to Kenya. And I worked at a legal aid office for women. It was FIDA Kenya, Federation of Women Lawyers in Kenya, in Nairobi. And that was my first time getting a passport, traveling abroad. And I got to stay with a Kenyan couple. And they were super interesting because the woman was Kikuyu and the husband was actually Indian. And they rarely mix in that society. But he was Christian. He was a pastor, actually. And his wife, Mary. And I stayed with them. And they were only just a little older than I was. So I was more like a cousin or a baby sis, and lived in the neighborhood. I would walk to work. And I just fell in love with, I think, the overseas life and the work that I could do overseas. I liked the work that I was doing with the women. A lot of it had to do with like land rights stuff. Some, a husband would die, and then like the family of the husband would come and basically take everything from the wife and the children. So we would defend the women in those cases. There was some sexual abuse stuff. I wasn't as involved in those cases, but I just really enjoyed the idea of working in a different culture on different topics, and just the lifestyle of living abroad. You're constantly learning something new, trying new things, seeing places. And so when I came back from that internship, and I had, to do my second and third year, and while I was in Kenya, I met and discovered for the first time the idea of the Foreign Service, because I had met this African American woman who was there. At the time, she was working for the League of Women Voters and was out in Nairobi on assignment. I met her. I don't even remember why. I think she knew someone at FIDA Kenya, and I was introduced to her. She was a little older than me. So I was just learning so much. And she was like, oh, people do this for a living. Like, live and work overseas and travel. And I had no concept of it, never considered it. And she invited me to go along with a meeting, to a meeting she had with a foreign service officer, a political officer at the embassy. Never heard of it, never knew what that job was, never really had to think about what an embassy does and what they do and what their role is. So I went with her, And that was my first time understanding that this is a career, a path. And so when I got back, I was like, you know what, I think I want to do this. And so I did my second summer uh, at a law firm, you know, because that's what everyone does. And I think I was in employment law. And I'm reading and doing work on this thing until I realized I was defending the corporation who was discriminatory and not the other person. And I was like, wait a minute. It really took me a minute to understand who I was defending and what I was doing. And then I realized, like, no, this isn't for me. And so my last year, now this is 9/11, so 2001, I was at NYU. Our clinics, I was in an immigrants' rights clinic, and our clinic is right in like Chinatown, where, you know, the southern part of Manhattan. And I'm on my way to school, and we hear about the tower. I'm listening to the radio. I'm hearing about the towers hitting. We're all thinking it's an accident until the second one hit. And we're walking back. I'm in Jersey City. I was about to take the path over. So 9/11 happens. Now I had already registered for the Foreign Service exam because I was like, okay, I think I want to do that when I graduate. Let me try to do this. And so 9/11 happens on September 11th. On September 21st, the State Department still gives that exam at John Jay in Brooklyn, New York. And I took it. And I found out I passed in December. And I was assigned on April 1st. I took my oral assessment and I passed first time up. And which apparently is not common, right? So I was really happy and proud and excited because this is what I wanted to do. So I graduate. I do take the bar and all that because you do all that work. You still take it. But I don't join a class. I took the bar in Maryland. I don't join a class of the Foreign Service until November of that year. So November 2022, I take the Foreign Service exam. I'm sorry, I join a class, the A100 class.
That's November of
2002.
2002. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah, November 2002. I entered the class. It was the 110th class, the 110th A100. And we were 94 because we were one of the last classes of Secretary Colin Powell's diplomatic readiness initiative. So he had 2 years of like, because I think in the 80s and early 90s, they weren't staffing appropriately. So there was this real lack of Foreign Service officers. I'm sure you're aware. And so they went 2 years of like every 2 months, they were putting in a new class. And these were like, instead of classes of 20 or 25, they'd be 75, 80, 90 people. We were 95 people in this class. 94. We were 94. And my last name at the time was Wright Young. So I was at the back and I was like the second to last, maybe person, third to last person in the back of the room. But yeah, so by funny story. So I get assigned, my first assignment was to Lagos, Nigeria. I laugh because they do a thing, they do what they call the follies every class, and it's basically like a talent show that everybody does when we go for like a retreat. And this was during the time when you know, those commercials, Miss Cleo calling me now, right? Those commercials. So my skit was that I was pretending to be Miss Cleo, right? And that every, like, no matter what people were saying they wanted and what they were thinking about when they're bidding, the answer was always Nigeria. Lagos, you need to go to Lagos, Nigeria, right? That was like this big tagline. So, like, for example, a couple would come in and say, oh, I, you know, my husband and I, our daughter's a figure skater. We really need a cold climate. We need a place where, you know, we can do this. And I'm like, oh, let me look at the ball and Lagos, right? Flag Day comes, which is the day when they announce because it's a big secret. You know, you order where you think you want to go. I, in hindsight, realized of the class of 94 people, you get to choose like 25 places, slots. We had 195 options. I just wanted to be on the continent of Africa, and I wanted to be in a major city. I really wanted to learn French. So my first couple of, you know, things, I think I'd put, like, at the time it was Abidjan, and I think it might have been Bamako, Mali, places like that. And I'm like, oh, if I can't get Francophone West Africa, let me try to at least get to Africa, particularly West Africa. And I think I put Lagos like number 6. Turns out I was the only one in the entire class that had Lagos anywhere on any of their things. I think I was the first one penciled in, but I'm just oblivious to that. So when it comes to Flag Day and they announce Lagos, Nigeria. They said my name, and then I think they say your name first, and then I can't remember what they do first, whether they say the country. That's what they do. They bring up the flag, right? And then and then they announce the name. And when they announced my name, the whole place erupted because it was this whole funny thing about the Lagos thing. And that's why I ended up going. I burst into tears. Like, not at the time, I pulled it together for the event, but I remember quickly going to find a phone to call my mother and cry like a baby about getting assigned to Lagos, Nigeria. I did not want to go. And I'm like, and I have to be able to petition it, and this has got to be something I could do. And they were like, there's nothing you can do. You're going, have fun. And so I'm like, okay. So I accepted it, and it was fine. Like, I don't know why I didn't want to go. I really wanted to learn French. And then people don't ever have nice things to say about Lagos. Well, it was the best time I ever had in my life. Dr. George, I actually met you there.
Yes, we did meet in Lakewood.
Exactly. And met some awesome friends like Storm, who worked with you, and like just people that I'm still very much in touch with. I'm still in touch with a lot of us are still in touch with people that I served with in my first tour. And Jessica Davis Bach, who's now an ambassador, first tour with us in Nigeria, in Lagos. And I was a consular officer there. And you're on the line, you're on the visa line. Now, this is a person who I didn't know before I joined the Foreign Service what a visa was. I had no connection to anything international. I used to tell people I'm plain old Black American, right? People from Brooklyn. My father's people are from Florida. Like, I had no notion of what a visa was, and things like that, and how valuable they were and how important they are to people. So I'm giving visas. I was on the non-immigrant visa line, and it was an eye-opening experience, a great learning experience, a lot of hard work. We'd be on that line from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., 1 hour lunch, 45 minutes lunch, maybe. It was, I mean, I would interview up to 150 people a day, you know. Yeah, it was crazy. And then we had the little boat, the American Club, because they would take us from Ikoyi, which is one of the smaller islands, and over to Victoria Island. You take the boat to go back home. And I remember just we would come back just exhausted, both physically and mentally. And mentally, it's exhausting, because unfortunately you're saying no a lot, probably more than you want to. I actually got in trouble once for because I was saying yes too much, which it wasn't really that much, but that's a whole nother conversation. Um, I got pulled in because they were like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "I'm doing my own assessments, and I think but that's when you start to understand some of the social politics and dynamics that come into play in your office. Some of the things that come from America and land smack dab in the work that you do. But I'm probably veering way off from the original question. But the origin story is that's how I'm taking you to my first assignment in the Foreign Service. And so that was it with State Department.
I also recall the ways in which you enriched my professional experience. Two instances come to mind. There was the case involving the welfare and whereabouts of a minor. She was a dual national. Parents were Nigerian, but she was born in the States. And I don't know if you recall, but this was a question where her paternal grandmother wanted to have a female genital mutilation ceremony performed. And her mother was incarcerated in the States and had reached out to ask for help. Do you remember that case?
To be honest, no.
Oh, okay. Well, you
I
had
remember the
asked me,
FGM stuff, like a little bit.
if I had a contact who might be able to help us, and I called on a friend of mine who's an attorney, and is also the executive director of Ward C, the Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center, and they provided some information for you. So that was one of the cases.
Oh, nice.
Now I'm slipping on the other one, but perhaps in our
Okay.
next interview I'll remember that one.
Okay.
Oh, I do remember. Um, we wanted to do some training, and you did training on sexual harassment in the workplace for the public affairs group. That was the other thing. So I found, my engagement with you professionally as well as personally very enriching.
Oh yeah, thank you. I remember the sexual harassment course, and then you invited me to speak to the press about consular issues, which were a
Mhm.
hot topic in Nigeria. So that was a good opportunity to do, just public speaking and public service, because I think what we were criticized for a lot, just being the embassy. Well, people always said the embassy, we know it's a consulate because it's not in the capital, but the consulate didn't communicate a lot or very well about the visa process, what's required, what's too much, how it works, and just having someone that they can speak to, I think was important um, to do that. Yeah, there was so many interesting stories that came off the line. Um, so many, like, yeah, people who yeah, you would just run into very serious cases of where you could play a role. I mean, that was the thing about consular work. It can be really intense, but it's also incredibly rewarding when you are bringing people together, or protecting people, but bringing people together in particular. Uh, um, yeah, I have some memories, like really strong memories about reuniting families, putting people together. I remember one case, and so the whole issue of, and now it's really popular and people are aware of, but that whole 90-day fiance thing, as a result of like the television show, people are more aware about K visas and things. So, we were dealing with this, years ago, right? And you would have situations where, as the American on the, you suspect that this American woman probably has no idea that this person's intentions might not be pure, right? And then learning to realize that I can't really police that. Like my main thing I have to figure out, and what I've been told, and you talk to the lawyers and you figure out what, you go back to Washington to find out like what are the rules and regs around this type of stuff. And so basically, if it's not fraud, it's not really for you to judge this relationship, right? And so I remember there was a case of a woman who, she was older by, so she was older, but so was the guy. There wasn't a huge age gap. There wasn't, but I don't know. I just, she hadn't really, had she met her, maybe she had come over once and they did the 5-day visit thing, which you see all the time, right? And they take pictures to show that, hey, we hung out and we're in love, right? And you have the pictures and things. And I met the guy. So who I'm seeing in person is the Nigerian applicant, right? Who I'm meeting. Nice enough guy. He was a pastor. I don't know if he was in Lagos, another city maybe he was from, but older gentleman. And by older, I mean like maybe he was in his late 40s, early 50s, right? Not like 20, like, because you would see that too. You see like a 50-year-old woman and a 20-year-old guy, and you're like, what's really going on, right? But I don't know. I was really on the fence about his sincerity, and this is, I was new, like I was like maybe 6 months into the job, right? And I denied it. I denied the visa because I didn't feel like his, I don't know, something told me like, well, I don't really know if he's if this is right, right? If this woman's getting taken advantage of. Because the other thing too is like you feel protective of the people on the other side, right? If people are being scammed, you want to make sure that they aren't being scammed, right? because we would get those phone calls too, right? Where we get a phone call that, hey, I remember distinctly getting a phone call where this guy actually got like a visiting visa. So he was able to somehow get over there on a visiting visa. He meets her at the airport and it was like, baby, I'm gonna go get the bags. And he leaves her there and never, that's it. And so she's calling back to the embassy, cancel his visa and go send out the troops to find him. And it's like, ma'am, can't do that. A worse situation, a lady called back, they go back to the house, the guy beats her up, ties her up, and leaves. Yeah, so these things happen, right? So I'm like, to give you context as to why I might be a little more protective of like, let's make sure everything is like legit. So I say no. And when I tell you, a team, I could not go to sleep that night. I couldn't go to sleep that night. It was on my mind. It was on my mind. I just was like, did I do the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Am I stopping these people from their life? Like, who am I? I'm praying about it. So the next day, and remember, he's a pastor, he's a Christian people, right? And he was so cool about it when I said no. That was the other thing. He was like, all right, well, I think you're making a mistake, but okay. The next day I get to work first thing in the morning, well, in their morning, because, we're ahead of them. I call the lady and she's a cafeteria worker at a school, like somewhere in the Midwest, like at an elementary school. But I call the number that she gave, they get her on the phone and I tell her who I am. And I'm like, listen, I saw your husband or your fiance. And as you know, I'm sure you're aware by now, I denied it, but I just wanted to talk to you, And she was like, yes, I saw that. And I was just so disappointed because, we really are, in love. And this is this is the person I want to be with. We talked for about 10 or 15 minutes, right? And I just shared with her and I said, okay. And now because my job is to just make sure it's a legitimate situation. So I hung up with her, sent an email to him to come back, brought him back in, and I gave him his visa. And about a month or two later, I think they sent me an email because you could, in the box and stuff, they saying they got together and everything. Because I never forget, the guy's name was Kingsley. I do remember that, which is funny because I ended up marrying someone named Kingsley, but that's all another story. But and so they went off and they were happy, and I was happy. So that had to be 2003. I promise you, a team, fast forward 2015, I get a ping on my LinkedIn, the guy Kingsley. And he was like, ma'am, I don't know if you remember me. Because I'm married now, but I put in my LinkedIn like my maiden and married name, right? So people could still see. He was like, you gave me a visa all these years ago. You brought me back. It's the same guy. I called, so he was like, we ended up talking. They married and they were together for like 12 years. They ended up divorcing. But he was like, but we're still friends. We had a good life. He reached back out after all those years.
That's fascinating. That's
crazy.
Interesting.
It was like, so I really felt like I made, ultimately I feel good about that decision, that they were able to connect and have a good life and do all that good stuff. But yeah, it was a fascinating job. It probably was one of the most interesting jobs I've ever had. And I've had a lot of jobs, but I've had a lot
of which I seem to recall trying to infect you with the public diplomacy bug.
You did.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why in my second assignment, I was actually slated to be a management code officer. Mm-hmm. And I would have been doing general services, GSO, because everybody does consular their first tour. And then you kind of go into your assigned cone after that, if it's not consular. And I was like, nope, I loved the work that you did. I loved how you were an officer and how you connected to people. I saw that public affairs, cultural affairs, in particular, you reached a different segment of the population that was like fascinating to me, whether it was students and professors, whether it was artists, whether it was NGO workers. So I wanted to go do that. So my next assignment, I applied to be a cultural affairs officer in Cameroon, in Yaoundé, Cameroon, and I got that position. Got to finally learn French, which is what I always wanted to do, and loved every second of my time in Cameroon. Well, okay, I won't say every second. First 6 months are always hard wherever you go, but I cried like a baby when I had to leave Cameroon. I love that country.
Hmm.
You know, it was, and I think I had the best possible job you could have there because you're traveling everywhere. You're meeting all types of people. I got to be really creative. I created a First Fridays concert series in Cameroon where I would put on events every month. That really, we talked about US government stuff, but also I use it as a vehicle to really promote and highlight Cameroonian acts, artists as well, because they did not have that infrastructure there. Their government wasn't providing that. So if you are familiar with someone like, so if you follow world music, there's a group called Ex Malaya, out of Cameroon. They were, when before they were who they are now, they were at our First Fridays events.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. You know, it was just an awesome experience, and I loved that role. Um, I loved being a foreign service officer there. I loved my time in Cameroon. I loved being in cultural affairs in particular. And I was lucky to have really good bosses and people. And there was a really good ambassador who was engaged with the community, who was well loved by the population. So that's always nice too, because if we were going out with him and going out and about, it's good that you have a well loved ambassador. You have a better experience. And then he was open to doing really unique and cool things. That was Niels Marquardt, Ambassador Niels Marquardt. But yeah, it was a great experience. And yeah, so those are my two tours in with the Department of State.
And you also were a desk officer in Washington.
Yeah, that was an experience I did not enjoy.
Hmm.
Uh, I'll be very honest and candid there. So I came back. If I could do it all over again, and I wish that I had maybe sought more counsel. That's the one thing I would give advice to young officers is before you make major decisions, you talk to more seasoned folks, because I just felt like, oh, you do two tours and then you come back to Washington. I shouldn't have come back to Washington. Like, I think it would have been smarter for me to stay out because I like being out. And when you come back to Washington, you're like a bureaucrat, right? And I'm still young. I'm still on the high of cultural affairs. And I should have gone out again in public affairs, like go back out overseas. There was nothing bringing me back home. I didn't have kids. I could have just been out. But I came back and I was a desk officer for Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Remember, this is before the big earthquake. This was at the top of '07. Sorry, at the top of '08. I came back at the top of '08. Ran into my first, and I'm sure if you talk to people in the State Department, I had a racist boss.
Mm.
Just what it was. I don't think he didn't see any value that I could possibly, like, I don't think it crossed his mind that I could bring value to the role. And I remember he was having a tough time with his secretaries, other Black women who did not play games with him at all, right? And so he would avoid her. And so I remember him coming into my office and saying, I mean, I got along with the woman fine, but listen, I'm gonna, you could really help me out here and you can manage the calendar. And this is what you can do, you can, so basically he's asking me to be the secretary, be the admin, because he doesn't want to like manage her. And then, you're telling me I had just gotten promoted to my 3. I'm flying high, thinking I can do some real substantive work. And no disrespect to that work, but that's not what I was hired to do. Right. And you pay someone to do that. And then when it comes time for me to do my evaluations and my my package, this is going to be a death knell for me. Right. So I could just see really quickly, like I remember we were going to an event he let a door slam in my face, would turn, I mean, it was really bad. He was really bad. If I could do it all over again, I may have um, maybe filed a complaint, but I didn't. I did talk to some other officers, some Black officers, seasoned, and I think they're in it long enough too that I don't think we have a lot of confidence in any of those types of systems, like of reporting and things like that. It ends up hurting you more than it ends up hurting the perpetrator, right? So then it becomes like, well, how can we get out of that? You know, um, I knew I wasn't going to last long there. Professionally, it would have killed me. And I know plenty of people who one bad EER stays with you for so long, like it can stay with you for a very long time.
Excuse me, EER
Employment evaluation
report?
report. Yeah, EER. Yeah,
Employee evaluation report.
yeah,
That's just for those who might watch our interview.
exactly. Sorry. The yeah, so your yearly evaluation, which is what you earn your promotions through. It's like you are your whole existence as an employee is based on what's in that EER report, because that's what it's what's in that ER, because that's what the promotion panel sees exclusively. So everything is there. Especially at that time. I think now they do some more 360s and there's other things that they can consider, but at the time it was just that. And so I knew, like, I got to get out of here sooner rather than later, or this is going to be devastating to me. And besides the fact that I was miserable, like I hated going to work because he was awful. And yeah, I just did not have, it was not a good time. So as that was happening, I get a call or an email from contacts that I made in Nigeria so one of the other things that I did when I was in Nigeria, my first assignment, was I created a cashless system. So on that visa line, especially when I was doing immigrant visas, I realized, like, if I had a family of 4 and they were going to be issued a visa, they would have to come, right, to get their pictures and stuff. It was $335 they had to come with per person. So a family of 4 is showing up with close to $1,500 cash, right? Because the system was completely cash. This is 2003, 2004. So ended up, I don't know how I made the initial contact with these folks, but we ended up, I can't remember. Honestly, I can't remember. But because I'm realizing, like, the time, gosh, it's a long time ago now. But ended up connecting with the bank and the MD of the bank. Actually, I think they just pitched us. I think they just brought in a proposal, and I was one of the people in the meeting. And I was like, oh, this is a great idea. So basically what they wanted to do was that people would pay at their local bank, and they would have scratch cards that, like, for each one. So, like, here's the immigrant visa for an adult, for a child, and then you would get the money, and then the money would be transferred to our system electronically, and that's how we would sweep the money, etc. So essentially all the family had to show up with was the scratch card, and we would scratch it when we got here. They would enter the information, and we know that it was paid. We worked about 3 or 4 months to get that off the ground. I had a really supportive uh, supervisor, 2 really supportive supervisors, Bill Howe and Yvonne Barber. Yvonne Barber's another sister that was in the Foreign Service for a long time, retired. And we got that system off the ground. I won an award for that, a meritorious service, so meritorious honor award for that work. So that person who helped me implement that system calls me, and he's like, hey, Noelle, we're about to start a company in Nigeria to help Nigeria go cashless. Would you like to join us? Well, I'm in this miserable job, and I'm like, yeah, I need to go. You know what I mean? So I first took a leave of absence because I wasn't sure how I wanted to leave. And then I moved to Nigeria, private sector, and left.
Waiting.
Mm-hmm. I left. And a lot of people thought I was crazy, right? Because they're like, what are you doing? At this point, I had been in 7 years, something like that, 02 to 08. Yeah, so like 6 years. close to 6 years. And I was like, yeah, let me go do something else. Let me see. I was like, and I always feel like I'll bet on me. Like I'm gonna be all right. Like I feel like I'm talented enough, I'm educated enough. I'll land on my feet like a cat. Okay. So somehow or another it's gonna work out. And so my best friend and I, who's in is and she was a banker in marketing at the time, we both got offered positions to Nigeria. And that's when I showed up in May of '08. I showed up in Nigeria working for that company. And it's interesting because I think I ended up being friendly with like one other person. There was one sister at the consulate. Now I'm back in Lagos, that I knew. And this is like, for them, it was what, was it 3, 4 years later? 3 years later, I'm back 4 years later. Because I left in '05, at the top of '05, I believe. And now I'm coming back like mid '03. So about 3 years later.
Mid
And sorry, mid '08.
Mhm.
Sorry, come back in mid '08.
Mhm.
And yeah, but it's interesting because the embassy is not always, it's not necessarily welcoming, right, to people. And I don't know. Especially I felt like, especially the Black Americans, unless you knew one who was already in there, you know. Um, and so I knew one, but even then it was like, we were cool, but not, I wouldn't necessarily hang out with other people at them. So like I was there 2 years, and I don't think I stepped foot in there once because I needed like pages and a passport, something like that. So my old colleagues, my old FSN colleagues, they were happy to see
Service
me. I was happy to
national
see them.
colleagues.
Right, my Foreign Service National colleagues, the Nigerian colleagues that I worked with.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I actually, funny enough, was still in contact with some of them on a personal level, like let them know that I came back, because I was cool with a lot of them. But that was it. Yeah. So then I came back and worked in Nigeria, private sector. And when I was there, I ended up meeting my husband and married and all that. So I wasn't tied to the embassy though at all, or to the consulate.
May I ask, what was the aftermath of leaving that desk job? Was there any fallout? How was your decision to take a leave of absence received? What was the
It
feedback?
was fine. I think I told them I just needed it for personal reasons,
Mhm.
that I had business to attend to out of the country that I needed to focus on.
Mhm.
And they were like, okay, well, I said, I got 2 weeks. And I remember them asking me, like, look, we really do need you here for the 2 weeks. Like, don't try to change anything about that. But that was it. And then even when it was time for me to officially leave, because remember, I did a leave of absence that was granted, but I didn't, when it was time for me to resign, they didn't come looking for me. I went to them and
Mhm.
said, hey, I think I want to resign. If I could do it all over again, I should have just let it stay longer, because then I would have had rights to come back
Mhm.
when
Yeah.
I left. Now, like, after a certain number of years, you can't really come back, right? Like after a certain amount of time. So, or you start all over again.
Mhm.
So, and then, like I said, I was kind of over the State Department at a certain point, like I wasn't as, when I thought about going back, because now I'm like, so I get back, um, I'm pregnant with my first child, and we come back, and I was here a number of years before we decided, like, hey, maybe we should think about the Foreign Service again. We like that lifestyle and living overseas and living abroad. So now it's like, okay, but I had missed the window to come back, and I was gonna have to start again. And that's where USAID came in, because I realized, like, in my work and travels, I had heard about aid a lot. And when I was overseas, I remember in Cameroon specifically, they were like, because aid had left Cameroon, I think in 1999, because sometimes they'll close missions and things. And those people were upset. They missed them. They missed aid. They were like, they did such great work. They had a lasting impact. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting, because neither one of the posts that I served at had aid. In Nigeria, they're in Abuja. They're not in Lagos, because they're always in the capital. So I never got to really work directly with them. And then Cameroon didn't have one. But I learned about what they did, and then learned about development in particular And when it was time for me to explore coming back, I realized that that's what I wanted to do, was to explore um, development work, right? Where you're, and the difference between, and it's been explained to me, and I was like, yeah, this makes sense. Diplomacy is advancing U.S. interest, right? Making sure our interests are advanced, and even when we're doing like good work, it's like with a U.S. tilt, and you know what I mean, like ultimately, like what's in it for us. With development, you are hand in hand with that host government to help them achieve their goals. So the whole mission is a little different. The way we engage is different. Um, I think how we treat our foreign service nationals and our colleagues is markedly different, and it's like night and day. And I got to see that really. So when I decided to come back into so I did a lot of other stuff, which I won't get into. Like I worked at Howard, I worked for the Food and Drug Administration, I worked for State Department on the civil service side in the grievance office. So that's what I was saying. I've had a lot of jobs. In a really diverse career, which I appreciate. And I think it's served me well. And always moving in the right direction, but just different. It's varied, right? But when it was time for me to come back, I was hired as a democracy and governance officer with USAID, what we call a DG officer. And DG deals with like elections, fiscal transparency, human rights, rule of law, those types of things, right? And I think when they saw that law degree, they were like, "Oh, DG," right? Because I applied for like so many different positions, but DG is my position, and I think it was a perfect fit. Like of all the positions I could have had, I think this was the perfect one for me. So it worked out. But that's how I ended up joining state as I applied. Sorry, joining USAID as I applied for the position and got it. And so I joined. I interviewed. That was another long process, but I think I applied in May of 2015. I interviewed in August of 2015. I didn't get into a class. Like I got into so then you have the clearances, which is just still even just being transferred over. It still took all this time. And I ended up joining a class in May of 2016. Like they have an incoming class. So it's we call it C3. It's Career Candidate Corps. So I was in the 10th Career Candidate Corps class. And we were 21 officers. There were like 6 or 7 of us that were DG, different like the different types of what we call backstop. That's like the equivalent of a cone in the State Department, but backstops, and it's like your technical focus area. And so that's how I joined USAID technically in May of 2016.
Fascinating. I wonder whether you would consider stopping here and doing a second interview where we focus on your career as a USAID Foreign Service Officer.
I think that would be awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for taking the time to engage in this very important work, playing the Angels game,
Oh, thank you.
exploring perspectives of Black Foreign Service women. And you have a unique career path, and having served both at state and aid, I think this is going to be one of those interviews that people are going to watch again and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. G. So to be in that country, and it's like some things were more modern and new, but then at the same time, it felt like it was like stuck in time, you know, um, which made me sad a little bit. But I still had an awesome time, and I did see, some certain things of people, but the people are like very resilient, and they're gonna make a way, like a lot of folks do. So that's how I ended up, so I did 1 year in Ghana for personal reasons. I had to come back to the States. And so I got back here but it's been about 18 months. I'm going on 2 years now that I've been back. But when I came back, I joined the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Office at USAID. It was newly stood up. a couple of months before I got there. And I was the division chief for development programming and partnerships, where we focus a lot on engagement with MSIs, engagement with the private sector to support
MSI
diversity.
being?
Sorry, minority serving institutions. So things like HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, Asian American Pacific Island serving institutions. So places like that, just to ensure, because twofold. One, you want to help increase the pipeline of diverse candidates that come through, but not on the HR tip. You have an HR office that does those things, but then also sensitizing. And there's many ways to engage, and also like working with the universities for like faculty exchanges to get them involved in international development. You want to highlight what international development is and the ways that you can have pretty much any major and come and get involved in this work. So that's where we are with that. And so it was, I did that for about 18 months, and then I rotated to the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, which is OSDBU, affectionately known as OSDBU. Yes.
Before you go on to OSDBU, could
Yes.
you give us one or two examples of the work that you did in the DEIA space in terms
Sure.
of engagement?
So one of the things that I was immediately tasked with was putting on our MSI conferences. So I got there in August, and by October, we did one for HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, and there's like a 2-day in-person event at Florida International University. So we had our HR people come out to speak to students. We have presentations on what is USAID, how do you work with us. We have presentations for our faculty and administrators on how to position yourself for grants and contracts that USAID has. We have over 21 billion a year that we give out in contracts and grants.
Excuse me, that was billion with a B.
Billion with a B.
Thank you.
Yes. Lots of money. Because you have to remember, with USAID, we are, in addition to development, we're also humanitarian assistance. So any earthquake and, tropical storm, war, when they say, oh, the US is coming to help, that's us. When you see the pictures with the people with the vest and bags of rice and dropping down, that's USAID. Sometimes in conjunction with DOD, Department of Defense, right, depending on the nature of the challenge. But yeah, that's us. So there's a lot of money and resources that go into us as an agency. And we do need partners to get that work done. I think our agency is only about 13,000 people, but we work in over 120 countries across the world, and in places that are developmentally challenged, right? That have development challenges. So hard work, small batch of folks doing it. And it takes a lot of money to do it. So those were the presentations that we did.
How many implementing partners?
Oh gosh, I don't have a number off of head, but it has to be a couple of hundred, many hundred probably. I mean, you have your big ones, but then implementing partners, you can choose them for any individual project. So little old me in Senegal had my one implementing partner for this one particular project. And so you just multiply that out. So we're talking hundreds. And the partners we can partner in many ways. So you can partner with a private sector to do certain things. You can, when I say like corporations like PepsiCo, for example, Foundation does stuff for us. We partner with the UN. My implementing partner for my work in Senegal was actually the United Nations Agency for, UNODC, United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, because they managed trafficking issues, and forced child begging is considered a trafficking issue. So their regional, like their West Africa regional office, was the implementing partner for the project that I worked on. Yeah. So that's, it's incredibly diverse, like in terms of who we work with and the ways in which we work with them.
Beautiful. That's really fascinating. And now the work that you're doing in small and disadvantaged business?
Yeah, businesses. So going back to that 21 billion that we'd like to share, we have numbers that are actually given out by the White House as to how there's always an interest in making sure U.S. small businesses get a piece of the pie, and not just the big corporations that we work with. And so we have a target. I think last year we had, it was either 17% or 23%, I have to remember, but of our contracts and grants should go, especially the contracts should go to small business, US small businesses. And then within that, there are categories of small businesses that we like to focus on, and they have their own distinct percentages and goals. So you have women-owned small businesses, you have socially disadvantaged small businesses, and that can include, that tends to be what we think of as like minority-owned businesses, Asian, Latino, Black, veteran-owned businesses. They get a special like recognition and effort. And then you also have service disabled veteran-owned, where we try to make sure we get that population to be a part of the work that we're doing. And then you have hub zones businesses, and hub zones are places that are traditionally economically depressed or don't traditionally have access to funds and resources. And so you want businesses that are situated there and have a certain percentage of people that work in there, or who work or come from those regions that work there, to also, so that's called a hub zone business.
Could you give a couple of examples of hub zones that USAID is engaging now?
I don't want to speak out of turn, because that's not the section that I work with. I work with, I'm not a hub zone portfolio manager. So I manage a portfolio for food security. So I can talk about that. And I manage some of the portfolios for Ghana and Nigeria, funny enough. So we do have small businesses that are doing, I have a small business that's doing like a big project, a water project in Liberia, $25 million project. I have a small business we have a small women-owned business that just got a $25 million contract for translation services. She's Latina, woman-owned business. You have a lot of small businesses that are doing like HR, like providing HR services, providing IT services. Those are the types of things, but you also see the stuff that's overseas. Some of them, that one I was mentioning in Liberia, he has many, his company has many. He had some stuff in Nigeria. He's interested in doing additional things. And that's where I come into play, because my job is when these contracts come up and we know, okay, we're going to have like a $50 million contract to do X. Hey, can a portion of that be set aside specifically for small businesses? Pieces of this work that we know we have small businesses or even economically disadvantaged small businesses, or small businesses that can do this work. Can we set it aside so we know for a fact that it will go to a small business? That's my job, is speaking with those contracting officers and speaking with those missions to get those set aside. And letting them know, like, you got some great talent here. You just don't know about it, because the default is to just go with the people we know. The big, I heard I'm not supposed to say beltway bandits anymore. You're supposed to say highway helpers. So
highway helpers, huh?
Highway helper.
I love it.
I know. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll go with highway helper. So, so that the same people just don't get it. And then we also try to work with the highway helpers to say, look, you subcontract a lot. Can you try to make sure you subcontract with these people? Because we can get credit for that as well. Like, in terms of, as the agency, do we get credit for saying that we're doing that? So there's multiple ways at which you're trying to do that. So that's my new job. And I've only been doing it for like 6 months, but I like it. So it's my work in the States is very different than overseas. I tell people, and this, you're a diplomat when you're overseas, you're a government worker when you're back here. So, but still work just as hard. I feel like I'm still giving back to my community, but my community is this one now and not necessarily the one over there. Still doing good work, which is what is meaningful to me. And I've always liked that. And that's what I liked about, even when I worked at state as a cultural affairs officer, as you know, like, I saw the work that you did as a public affairs officer. Like, to me, that's like the closest thing to development that you can do at state. And that's what I loved about it. And so I'm trying to do, I feel good about the work that I do. I'm proud of the work that I do at AID. And I'll be here until I'm not. I'm actually eligible for retirement sooner than I know, like in 2.5 years. I'm not sure. I'll see what I'll do. But if I like my work and I like what I'm doing, I'll just continue to do it. But I am really liking this small business space and the work that's coming with it. Um, there's a lot of room to grow. You're learning constantly about new things. Every business has their own thing that they're doing. Um, so it's a learning curve, but one that I'm interested in. So I'm excited about it.
Noelle, could we pivot from the professional to the personal?
Sure.
You have two lovely children, a son and a daughter, and I've heard foreign service children referred to as third culture kids. Do you want
Yes.
to talk at all about their experience? You mentioned how much they loved Senegal. They're now back in the States and what that means.
Sure. So my children, when we first went to Senegal, they had been growing up in the States, Maryland, and they did like a quick stint in Georgia for a little while. So they were in kindergarten and second grade. And in Dakar, it was the International School of Dakar, an international school. So the kids were from all over. It's an American school, essentially. So the teachers were pretty much, you had some diversity in the teachers, but a lot of them American teachers and all that comes with that, if we're honest, right? Because if you pick up America and drop it off, some of the same challenges exist, particularly around racism and things. But my kids were very young and we didn't have to deal with too many issues. I liked the school. They liked the school. We had a good experience. So we were there for 4 years. So when we left, my daughter had just finished third grade. And then, yeah, Xavier had just finished fifth grade. So we came, then we moved to Ghana, and I didn't put them in the American school in Ghana because you can choose like where you want to put your kids. It was important to me that they got to experience like the country that we were in as much. I didn't put them in the like you would say like the French school in Dakar because I knew one, they didn't speak any French, and so that would have been a problem. But then also I wasn't going to be staying probably like in a francophone. Their world wouldn't be francophone, right, and French speaking. So I was okay with the International School of Dakar, English speaking, and they had the American curriculum. But they did do the IB, International Baccalaureate, and then the younger years is called PYP. So I liked the style of teaching and what they were learning.
What does PYP stand for?
Something, was it primary youth? Something, I'm not sure. But it's essentially the International Baccalaureate program, but for younger years. The same concept of like how they teach, right? Which is very like exploratory and things like that. Less rote, okay, memorization, spit it back, more experiential, things like that. But they were doing that in the younger years. So there's a term for it. It's like, I want to say primary years, primary middle, something, but I don't want to get it wrong. But it's essentially what that is. It's just a junior version of the IB program. And they implemented it while I was there. Like, we were one of the first people to do the first and second year while we were at ISD. I put them in the British school, which is it's like the Ghanaian school in Ghana, which is where essentially all the like elite Ghanaians went. But it's a British system, right? And so it was really rigorous, which is what I wanted. They were surrounded by Ghanaians. Their teachers were Ghanaian, the administrators were Ghanaian, and their classmates. Because I wanted my children, their father is Nigerian, and I wanted my children to feel very comfortable in West Africa. Whether, and they wouldn't, I think they had a better chance of feeling comfortable and understanding the culture if they went to school in that environment and really, because we have a very sheltered existence being with the embassy. Can't help it. They do everything for you. They give you a car, anything's wrong, you call somebody, come fix it. You're not really immersed in the day-to-day the way an average person from that country would live. Even a wealthy person from that country would live. You just aren't. And I've lived both, so that's why I can speak to that. And so I wanted a little bit of a taste of that for my children. And they loved theirs. Well, I'll say this: my son really loved it. He loved the rigor. He loved, his math teachers were Black and Black males. You rarely see that in the States. So getting him to understand, like, yes, you can be, not living under those stereotypes that Black Americans are kind of forced to live under in the States. And we just don't even know that we live like that. It's not until you leave it that you really understand it. At least that's been my experience, where you make a really concerted effort to understand it. My daughter, She didn't like it as much because it was rigorous. She's like, this is hard and I'm not enjoying it. But I'll tell you this, when they came back over to the States, remember they only got 1 year of it. They're rocking and rolling here. And one of the things my son said was like, Mom, they don't really take education seriously here in the States. Like, like there's no homework. It's kind of like just the way school culture is. My daughter's getting straight A's. My son is getting like, I'm not pressuring them to do any of that. They just, they were always good students. But, in Ghana, it was spelling tests every week. Here's your 20 new words. You're writing it down like old school. You know what I mean? Real old school. And I love that for them. I love that for them. That was the hardest part about leaving Ghana and not, I wish I could have stayed a year or two more simply for the education thing for my kids, honestly. But I landed, I think, in a pretty good place back home. Where I live now is like kind of home for me. My mom is here, my siblings, and then they're back. And like I have a new nephew who's the cutest little thing. He's 2, and the kids play with him. And they're bonding again with their grandmother. So it's good to be home. I think that helped the transition coming back as well. So, but they still say, man, I wish we could live back in Senegal. They love Senegal. They miss Senegal. We talk about Senegal at least once every 2 weeks for one reason or another, and how much we loved it. Yeah. So that's like the personal piece of it. And I just hope that it was a gift I wanted to give to my children, to be able to live, to see the world, to have a world view. I think they do. I don't think my son thinks that the only place he can live in the world is here. He feels like, I can go to London and go to school. I can go back to Nigeria. That's what I wanted for them, to feel like they can be at home anywhere, and to respect other world experiences. That this is not the only way or the best way or the ideal way for to live a life as a society.
Noelle, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the book that you authored.
Okay. Yeah. So it's called The Blackset Effect, the African American's Guide to Relocating to Africa. I authored the book while I was in Ghana, actually, because over the years, I have had dozens of people reach out, like friends, colleagues, mama's coworkers, whoever. Oh, I know somebody who wants to go to Africa. Can you talk to them about this? Or what do you think about that? And so I was like, somebody was like, I've always wanted to write a book. That was on my little bucket list from when I was 18 years old. And so I was like, I'll write a book about it, because I had seen so many over the course of my travels and living abroad, off and on for 20 years, right? In and out of the continent. I've lived in 5 different continents. 5 different countries on the continent. And you see Black Americans come thrive. You see Black Americans come and crash and burn. And I'm not talking about the ones that are with the government. That's a whole nother conversation. And again, like I told you, we're protected, we're insulated, it's different. But Black Americans, I would end up being, I'm always going to find my tribe, right? So I'm going to find some brothers and sisters wherever we are, and they find, we find each other. And they're there for various reasons. I made a lot of friends who were American school teachers, like teachers at the American school. A lot of sisters that do that, brothers that are over there working, or like they used to work and then they stayed. People who got married to people they're there for that reason. People who just said, I want to come. Retirees that come. So there's a many reasons why we may come. Some do a better job at preparing to come and preparing to stay. Right. That's the key. Understanding what it takes, why you make the decision, choosing the right place. Because you can go in vacation places, where you vacation, a place that's great for vacation may not be a great place to lay down roots and spend time, and understanding that what's driving you in the first place. So the book talks about, it's not just it is a nuts and bolts. Okay, I want to move. What do I do? Okay, you need a visa, you need a passport, then you might need a visa. You need to figure out how you're going to stay there, because a visa usually is just to allow you to travel and visit. After 6 months or even 90 days, you can't be there anymore. You can be deported as an American citizen. And people don't understand that, or figuring out how you're going to work. Some people have like misperceptions about the cost of living in places. They just assume it's automatically cheaper because it's Africa. And I'm like, wrong. if you have, especially at the level that they're going to want to live, right? As an American, you, as Black as we may be, as conscious as we may be, and I consider myself a conscious Black American, we're still very American. And there's gonna be some things you're gonna expect. When you turn the water on, you want it hot. When you want some power, like, you know what I mean? And so they're like, yeah, you gotta pay for that. You gotta pay for that. And it's not and it's not gonna be cheap. So, thinking about the lifestyle and the level that you want to live, you might be paying $2,000 a month. It's not gonna be $250. I don't know what you think it is. So that whole, and then you're in Lego. I mean, Legos is not cheap, especially living any way you halfway want to live. The car is expensive. It can be, and depending on where you're coming from. So, like, paying $600 a month might not be a lot, but then, okay, make sure your income is what it's supposed to be, because we've seen people. I saved $5,000. I saved $10,000. I'm ready to move to Africa. Your money's going with the ticket, and in a lot of these places, for example, with housing in the States, we pay our rent monthly. You might have to put a deposit down, whatever. Dr. G, how much do I have to pay in advance when I want to rent a house in Nigeria?
At least a year in advance.
Thank you. Exactly.
That could be $50,000 up front before you step through the door.
Before you step through the door. You talking 15, 20 G's off the rip at the minimum. So it's a whole different mindset. And those are the things. So I was hoping the goal of the book is to just prepare people and manage expectations around what it actually means to pick up and move. And I did do that when I left State Department, and I told you I went to go work for a private Nigerian company. I was there as a private citizen, and it was a very different experience. And I was lucky in that I was working for a Nigerian company, but I was able to negotiate what we call an expat package, where they were paying me in USD, but then I had to, and then it came with housing. It came, so but I knew enough to ask for that because I had been living there. And so I'm trying to tell you in the book, this is what you need to ask for if they want to hire you, or, because if you're just getting paid in local currency, when it starts tanking, that's it. I ended up switching companies in there, and we negotiated where he was like, I can't pay you all in USD, but okay, I secured X amount. I wanted 70% of it in USG, and then the rest was in local currency. Like, these are the conversations to have, because I know what it really means. My bills are still happening back in the States. I can't pay that in Naira when it's, devalued at 50% 6 months from now. So, it's those types of things. So that's what the book is aimed at doing. It's just, educating folks on that, and then having that conversation about, as a Black American, the unique challenges and opportunities and benefits, right? There's challenges that come with being Black as a Black American in Africa. And then there's also like a lot of good things that come from being Black in Black American in Africa. But just managing expectations, because, you have the folks that think, you step off the plane, oh, my brother, my sister, and then when you don't necessarily have that, it's like, what are these, they're not welcoming. And like, you just somebody, it's not necessarily that connection. And to be honest, and I tell people, if you meet people and that's the first thing they're talking about, that might be the hustle, because they know that's what you're looking for. Like my brother, my sister business. Like, if it's not like organic, then you might want to slow that down. So, they know that that's it. So just understanding that, we understand the slave trade, and we've learned about it ideally, and understand it. That's not necessarily taught in those schools, and the feeling about it is not necessarily the same. It's something that happened in the distant past. It doesn't impact them on a regular basis. We still feel the effects of it daily. So it's just a different mindset. Also, you have people that come, ugly American, just be an ugly Black American, in terms of like looking down on folks, criticizing every single thing. It's not like this, it's not like that. These people, they don't know what they're doing. I've witnessed that, heard that. I'm sure you have as well. And it hurts really bad when you hear Black Americans behaving like that, but we can. And so maybe, offering some insight as to maybe why you don't want to do that, and why we have to look at things differently. I use the example of, people know that a situation is messed up. right? Like they know the roads are bad and all this other stuff. Doesn't mean you can change anything about it, right? That the average citizen, I was like, you look at our situation with gun violence. I think you ask the average American, do we have a problem with violence in the States? Gun violence. Yes, we do. We all have our thoughts about how we might change that and what needs to happen. Does that mean anything's happening in Congress or the White is that doesn't mean that we can impact a change in that. You understand? So I might fully understand that this is wrong. It's a problem that's not going to stop the school shootings. So it doesn't mean I'm an idiot and that the whole society is stupid and inept because we can't change that problem. It's because we are not necessarily in a position to do that. And it's the same situation overseas, right? They're not necessarily in a position to make any changes, despite everybody understand what exactly is the problem. So just having like those kind of conversations, I think that's what differentiates the book from a typical, hey, how do you move overseas book?
Thank you so very much. We're rounding up this conversation, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to offer a message, particularly to the generations to come who will watch this video. What message might you share with them?
Thank you for that opportunity. I think the quick and dirty message will be see the world, go do it. If you have an opportunity, do it. One of my biggest regrets, and I know you're not supposed to regret, but one of my biggest regrets was when I was in college, I had an opportunity to do a summer internship in London, and I didn't do it. Looking back on it, I don't think I was maybe secure enough to do it, even like part of the work, but then also, wanted to be closer to boyfriend, something silly at the time, and I'm like, I think about how my life might have been different had I taken that trip at 21 years old, and lived and worked overseas, and in London, no less, which is a city that I absolutely love. And it's so diverse and, who knows? So any young, if you have an opportunity, and it can be go on a cruise, it doesn't have to be some major thing, but just seeing a different side of the world. There are many ways to skin a cat. There are many ways to live a life, to cook a dish, and to do it all. Try it. Don't turn your nose. Try not to turn your nose up and stuff. You can have limits on what you do. I don't eat everything, but I will try most things. Go see those places, take those trips, just be open to what the world may have to offer, because it might just really surprise you. And if nothing else, just to have said you've seen it or have said that you've tasted it, and you never know where that experience will be brought to bear on something that's happening in your future. So I guess the quick message would be to say yes, particularly say yes to travel and new people and new places and new things. It's never a bad thing. Even places that people say aren't good, or there's no such thing as a bad place. There's beauty in every place. You just have to find it.
Thank you so much, Noelle Ojo. This has been an honor and a privilege.
Thank you. Same here. Thank you for the opportunity.